Filthy little dealer. Officer Tatum spat the words like they tasted good in his mouth. Think we don't see what you're doing? He slapped the prescription bag clean out of 72-year-old Loretta Simmons' hands. It hit the pharmacy floor and burst open. Pill bottles rolled across the tile in every direction. Her arthritis medication, her blood pressure pills, the diabetes strips she needed every single morning of her life. Our Tatum's boot found the arthritis bottle first. He pressed down slowly, deliberately, grinding it into the linoleum until the label, her name, her doctor's name, her pharmacy number, blurred and tore beneath his heel. The sharp chemical smell of crushed pills rose into the air and mixed with his cologne. Loretta stood very still. She did not flinch. She had spent 38 years in rooms where people tried to make her feel small, and she had never once given them the satisfaction. In behind her, Officer Pruitt yanked both her arms up behind her back so hard her shoulder screamed. The handcuffs came down on her wrists like they were meant to punish, not restrain. Cold metal biting into skin that had never done a single criminal thing in 72 years of living. "Look at her," Tatum announced to the stunned customers frozen in the aisles, his voice loud and theatrical, drunk on every eye in the room. "Playing the helpless old lady. Comes in here every week, or acts like she's just picking up her little pills." He leaned in close to her ear, his voice dropping to something uglier. "We know exactly what you are." Loretta's cardigan slipped from one shoulder as Pruitt shoved her forward. She kept her chin up. Her eyes were dry. And Officer Tatum, grinning and certain and untouchable, had absolutely no idea that the woman he was dragging toward the door had spent 38 years learning the name of every lever in the system he thought protected him. He had no idea what was coming. Comment below where in the world you're watching from. And make sure you subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you will not want to miss. Now let's go back to the beginning. Loretta Simmons had driven the same silver Buick to Millbrook Family Pharmacy every third Saturday for 19 years. She always parked close to the entrance. Her arthritic hip made long walks a slow kind of punishment. And she always took her place in line with the quiet patience of a woman who had spent decades in waiting rooms, courtrooms, and hospital corridors and had made her peace with waiting. That particular Saturday morning, the air outside smelled of cut grass and the last of the spring honeysuckle. Loretta wore her dark green cardigan over a pressed white blouse, her silver hair pinned back neatly, her worn leather journal tucked under her arm the way it always was. She had carried that journal for 22 years. Inside it were 38 years of names, case notes, insurance codes, court dates, and in the margins of every third page, small quiet prayers for the people she wasn't sure she'd helped enough. The pharmacy bell chimed as she stepped inside. Earl Hutchins looked up from the counter and nodded. "Morning, Mrs. Simmons. Are your orders ready?" "Thank you, Earl." She made her way down the center aisle, nodding to faces she recognized. Old Mr. Grady squinting at reading glasses. A young mother near the baby supplies with a cart and an overwhelmed expression. Brianna, the stock clerk, restocking vitamins with her earbuds in. Loretta reached the counter. Earl had her bag ready, same as always. That was when she noticed the young woman standing at the far end of the counter. She was maybe 25, on a baby balanced on one hip, a prescription slip in her free hand, and the look on her face of someone who had just been told no and didn't understand why. Her insurance had rejected the medication automatically. The rejection code on the slip meant nothing to her. Earl had been trying to explain it for several minutes, and she was close to tears. Loretta set her purse down. "Honey, may I take a look at that?" She had the problem identified in under a minute. A prior authorization flag, or easy to resolve with one phone call to the doctor's office. She was walking the young woman through exactly what to say when the pharmacy door opened and the bell chimed, and the whole morning changed. Officers Ray Tatum and Derek Pruitt walked in like men who had already decided how the next 10 minutes were going to go. Tatum's eyes swept the room once and stopped on Loretta. The prescription bag on the counter, the journal under her arm. The young woman leaning close, listening. He didn't look at anyone else. Later, every single person in that pharmacy would say the same thing. He walked straight to her like he had her name written on a piece of paper in his pocket. Maybe he did. "Step away from the counter." His voice cracked through the quiet store like a hand hitting a table. Several customers startled. A child near the front began to whimper. "Both of you, now!" Loretta looked up at him over her reading glasses. Calm, steady. Are you speaking to me? You and your little associate." He said the word associate the way people say it when they mean something much worse. "We've had a tip. Controlled substance distribution. You've been using this pharmacy as your personal operation for months." The young mother's face went white. "She was just helping me. She was just reading my insurance form. Save it." Pruitt moved to her side, grabbing her arm. The baby started crying. Take your hands off that girl." Loretta's voice rose, sharp and clear, and it carried to every corner of that store. "She has an infant in her arms. She has done nothing. I have done nothing. I am a retired licensed social worker, and I have filled prescriptions at this counter for 19 years, and you will not stand here and lie about me in front of these people." Tatum stepped directly into her space, so close she could smell the coffee on his breath. His jaw was tight. His eyes were flat. You think I don't know how this works? Think I haven't seen 100 women just like you? Sweet old lady act? Real nice. Fools everybody." He smiled, slow and contemptuous. "Doesn't fool me." "There is nothing to see through," Loretta said, "because there is nothing there." "Empty the bag." He reached past her and snatched the pharmacy bag off the counter before she could move. Her medication hit the floor. Pill bottles scattered across the tile, rolling in every direction. He found her arthritis bottle with his boot and pressed down without looking away from her face. Slowly, the label tearing. Her name disappearing under his heel. The chemical smell of crushed pills rose sharp and bitter into the air. "That is my prescription," Loretta said. Her voice was shaking now, not with fear, but with something older and hotter than fear. "My name is on that bottle. My doctor prescribed every single one of those pills. You have no right—" He grabbed her journal from under her arm and threw it on the counter. "That is my personal property." She reached for it. "That has nothing to do with—" Pruitt came from behind, both hands on her arms, wrenching them back and up so hard she cried out. One short, involuntary sound that she immediately swallowed. The handcuffs snapped onto her wrists, tight and deliberate, the metal edge digging into her skin. Somebody do something." A woman near the vitamin aisle pressed both hands over her mouth, her eyes filling. "She's an old woman. She's done nothing wrong." "Everybody back." Pruitt swept the room with a look that dared anyone to move. "This is an active police investigation. Back up, or you'll be coming with her." An elderly man in the aisle gripped his walking stick and shook his head slowly, his face heavy with the expression of a man who has lived long enough to recognize an injustice he has seen before and cannot stop. Near the entrance, Brianna the stock clerk had gone very still. Her hand had moved quietly to the pocket of her apron. Her phone was already recording. Tatum grabbed Loretta's arm and hauled her toward the door, half dragging her, her shoes barely finding the floor. Her cardigan slipped from one shoulder. Her hair came loose from its pin. The customers parted in horrified silence as he marched her through the store she had walked into peacefully 19 years in a row. At the door, he turned back to the room, one hand still gripping Loretta's arm, and looked at the frozen faces with an expression of pure satisfaction. "That's how it's done," he said to no one in particular. "Keep your eyes open." The door swung shut behind them. For a moment, nobody in the pharmacy moved or spoke. Then the young mother with the baby pressed her forehead against her child's head and began to cry quietly. Earl stood behind the counter with both hands flat on the glass, staring at the door. The crushed pill bottle lay on the tile, with Loretta's name still faintly visible on the torn label. At the far end of the store, a security camera blinked its small red light. Recording. Uploading. Backing up to a server 3 counties away. Tatum didn't know about the server. He was about to find out. Millbrook's 2nd Precinct had applied for a federal community drug enforcement grant 3 years in a row. The grant was substantial, $400,000 annually, and it was awarded based on one primary metric: documented drug arrests and prosecutions within the precinct's jurisdiction. The first year, the numbers had been legitimate. The second year, they had been padded. By the third year, Like Captain Greer had built an entire system around manufacturing them. The targets were chosen carefully. Elderly residents, mostly black, who visited pharmacies regularly and carried medications that could, with the right framing, be described as suspicious. The arrests rarely led to prosecution. The evidence was never strong enough for that. But they didn't need to. They just needed to be documented, logged, counted, submitted with the grant application. $400,000 a year, distributed quietly across discretionary accounts that Greer controlled, used for things that never appeared in any official budget. Tatum and Pruitt were his instruments, transferred from two different precincts where internal affairs reviews had quietly stalled. Hand-selected because they understood that their job was not to enforce the law, but to serve the man who protected them from it. Loretta Simmons was case number 31. They had no idea that case number 31 was about to be the last one. The holding area smelled of industrial cleaner and something underneath it that the cleaner never quite reached. Loretta sat on the hard bench with her hands folded in her lap, her wrists red from the cuffs, her shoulder aching from the way Pruitt had grabbed her. They had taken her journal. That was the thing that sat heaviest. 38 years of names, of cases, of small prayers written in margins. Only she didn't know what they would do with it, and she didn't know if she would get it back. She asked once for her blood pressure medication. She was told it was being processed. She did not ask again. Down the hall, she could hear Tatum's voice, relaxed and satisfied, telling someone the arrest had gone smoothly. She heard Greer's name. She heard the word grant, and then something she couldn't make out. She closed her eyes. She thought about a young man she had worked with early in her career, 19 years old, picked up on a charge that had no business sticking, who had sat in a room not unlike this one and asked her, "Does it ever get better?" She had told him the truth as she understood it. Not on its own. Someone has to make it better. That's what we're here for. She thought about DeShawn Carter. She had not spoken to him in almost 2 years, but she knew what he did for a living. She had followed his work the way teachers follow the work of students they always knew would do something that mattered. When the desk officer, a young woman named Alicia who had barely looked up during booking, came by on her round, Loretta spoke quietly. "I need to make a phone call." DeShawn Carter was 36 years old and worked as an investigative journalist for the Millbrook Courier, the regional paper that most people in town still read on Sunday mornings. He had a reputation for patient, methodical work. He took a long time to publish things because he took a long time to be certain. He had a small office at the back of the newsroom with a corkboard on one wall that had been filling up for 9 months with documents, names, dates, and red string. In the center of the board was a single printed word, "Clear Path," which was what he'd been calling the pattern before he knew what was actually behind it. And he had stumbled onto it while investigating something else entirely. A tip about inflated arrest statistics in 3 county precincts. He'd started pulling grant applications and cross-referencing them with arrest logs and found a number that didn't add up. Too many drug-related arrests that never became prosecutions. Cases opened, documented, closed. People processed and released without charge, but not before being counted. He had traced the money to the federal grant, and he had traced the grant applications to Greer's precinct. He had names, dates, and financial records. What he didn't have was a clean, witnessed, documented incident that could anchor the whole story without legal challenge. He had been waiting for it for 3 months. When his phone rang at 4:15 that Saturday afternoon, and he heard Loretta Simmons' voice. Controlled, precise, and underneath the control something that in 38 years she had apparently never quite needed to use, he sat absolutely still for 5 seconds. Then he said, "Mrs. Simmons, don't speak to anyone else. Don't sign anything. I need you to tell me everything that happened, and I need you to know that I have been building toward this for 9 months. A pause on her end. "Then I suppose," she said quietly, "it was time for someone to finally give you the last piece." The morning after Loretta's arrest, Tatum arrived at Millbrook Family Pharmacy before it opened. He told Earl it was a follow-up to the investigation. He spent 11 minutes in the back office with the security system. When he left, the hard drive had been wiped. 48 hours of footage, gone. What Tatum didn't know, what he had no reason to know, because he had never looked into it, was that Millbrook Family Pharmacy had upgraded its security system 8 months earlier to a cloud-based backup service. Every second of footage was automatically mirrored to an off-site server within 90 seconds of recording. DeShawn had known about the upgrade because he had written a small business profile on Earl's Pharmacy 11 months ago, and Earl had mentioned it proudly. Brand new system. Backs everything up automatically. I sleep better knowing it's there. DeShawn had subpoenaed the cloud backup at 7 a.m., the morning after the arrest. By 9 a.m., he was watching the footage on his laptop in the newsroom. He watched it twice. Then he called the state attorney general's office, then the FBI field office, then his editor. "How long do you need?" his editor asked. 48 hours, DeShawn said. "And then we publish everything." At 6:50 a.m., the cell door opened. Lieutenant Renee Okafor stood in the doorway, her expression professionally neutral in the way of someone who has read a situation clearly and is choosing her next steps carefully. "Mrs. Simmons, you're being released. There's someone here for you." DeShawn was in the lobby. He was holding coffee and a paper bag from the bakery on Deacon Street. He looked like he had been awake for most of the night, which he had. Loretta walked across the lobby and stopped in front of him. She looked at him the way she had always looked at him. Not the way most people look at someone who has come to rescue them, but the way a person looks at someone who has finally arrived at the place they were always heading. "My journal," she said first. "It's being returned as part of the evidence release. I made sure of it." He handed her the coffee. "Mrs. Simmons, I need to tell you what I know." They sat in the lobby for 40 minutes while he told her everything. The grant scheme, onto the manufactured arrests, the 30 cases before hers, the footage, the subpoena, what was coming. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. 30 people, she said. "At least. Probably more we haven't found yet." She looked at the coffee cup in her hands. "Then we make sure every single one of them is in that story." DeShawn's piece ran on the Courier's front page 41 hours after Loretta's release. The headline was simple: "Manufactured arrests, federal fraud, and the elderly residents of Millbrook's 2nd Precinct." It ran 6,000 words. It included the cloud backup footage, the grant applications, the financial records, the names of 31 residents who had been processed through Greer's system, and a clear accounting of where the federal money had gone. It named Greer, Tatum, Pruitt, and Frank Colby, Greer's brother-in-law, who had been quietly steering a portion of the grant funds into private accounts through a consulting arrangement. By noon, it had been picked up by the state wire. By 3 p.m., 2 national outlets were running it. By evening, the Attorney General's office had announced an emergency review, and federal agents had arrived at the 2nd Precinct with a court order. Tatum and Pruitt reported for their shift and found their badges deactivated and 2 federal agents waiting at the entrance. Greer was escorted from his office at 12:40 p.m. He walked out through the precinct he had controlled for 11 years past officers who had worked for him and beside him, and in some cases had quietly looked away from things they should not have looked away from. None of them met his eyes. In the parking lot, a small group of residents had already gathered. They weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They simply stood there and watched him go. 2 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning, Loretta Simmons drove to Millbrook Family Pharmacy and parked in the spot closest to the entrance. She wore her dark green cardigan. She carried her purse and her journal, the leather worn soft and creased, returned to her exactly as DeShawn had promised. The bell chimed when she pushed through the door. Earl came around the counter before she had taken 3 steps and hugged her without saying anything for a moment. "I should have done more," he said when he stepped back. His eyes were red. You did what you could," Loretta said. "What matters now is what we do next." The new security camera was clearly visible from the entrance. There was also a printed card on the counter near the register, laminated, that read, "Every person at this counter has the right to dignity and respect. If you feel unsafe, our staff is here." Small. Laminated. The kind of thing most people would walk past without reading. The right people would read it. Loretta collected her prescription and stood for a moment near the spot where the young woman's medication had been knocked to the floor. She looked at the tile. She thought about 31 people who had stood somewhere like this and been made to feel like criminals for filling a prescription. Then she put her journal under her arm and walked back out into the morning. Captain Howard Greer was indicted on 19 counts including federal grant fraud, civil rights violations, conspiracy, and abuse of office. Officers Tatum and Pruitt faced charges of false arrest, excessive force, and evidence tampering. Frank Colby was charged with fraud and financial conspiracy. The grant money, 3 years of it, was ordered repaid in full. The Attorney General's office announced that all 31 cases connected to Greer's scheme would be expunged from the records of every person affected. Letters of formal apology would be issued. A compensation fund was established. Loretta Simmons declined her individual settlement. She asked instead that the money be directed to something she had been thinking about since the night she sat in that cell and thought about 38 years of people who had no one to call. 6 months later, the Millbrook Community Legal Clinic opened in a rented space on Deacon Street, 3 blocks from the pharmacy. It offered free legal advice to elderly and low-income residents facing wrongful charges, insurance disputes, or housing issues, and anything else the system had decided they didn't deserve help with. Loretta ran it herself, 4 days a week, her journal always on the desk in front of her. On the wall behind her desk hung a single framed card. DeShawn had given it to her at the opening. It was a printout of the note he kept above his own office door, the one he had been carrying for 16 years. Character is what you do when no one's grading you. Below it, in her own handwriting, she had added one line, and justice is what you build when the grading is done. At the clinic's opening, DeShawn stood near the back of the small crowd and watched Loretta shake hands and hug former students and talk to an elderly man who had driven 40 minutes because he'd read about the clinic in the paper and had a situation he didn't know what to do with. She listened to him the way she had always listened, completely, without hurry, with the full weight of her attention. DeShawn thought about a community college classroom 16 years ago. A young man who said the system and meant it as a complaint, and a woman who looked at him steadily and said, "Then learn it well enough to change it." She was still changing it. She had never stopped. If this story moved you, please like and subscribe, and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that one person with courage and a long memory can change everything. Tomorrow's story is already waiting.